Hello, I just want to say that um, I remember Mrs. Humphreys at Queen Margaret's much recommended to us the novels if we wanted novels that weren't necessarily just a list of dates to do. In some ways, it was a postmodern anyway, even before postmodernism came in, because Georgette-Heyer would have had to guess some of the details around what happened in the Regency period and the 18th century. There would have been costume books and some reference material, but much of it she would have had to guess anyway. And I very much enjoyed reading Georgette-Heyer, and I was also impressed that Mrs. Humphreys wanted us to try and imagine ourselves into the situation of history, but also wanted to refine it somewhat. In Georgette-Heyer, I remember it's not uncouth, and that women don't necessarily suffer terrible pain or catch VD or something like that. Also just to say that literature degrees that completely miss out women authors may be somewhat mistaken in that judgment, because novel writing was a popular form of literature in the first place. That was partly why they were called novels, because it was novel, which wasn't high poetry or epic poetry necessarily, and was meant to be popular literature to some extent, a little bit different from, some of the authors did publish in chapters and newspaper type form anyway in the first place, but I wouldn't have said it need be throwaway literature. I also remember how very popular Barbara Cartland was. I didn't read many of her books, but I do admire somewhat her reworking of the Thomas Hardy idea, with the idea that a poor girl might marry a rich man in a Cinderella fashion. It didn't necessarily all end in tragedy. But just to say also that it's not impossible that some of the famous authoresses, such as Jane Austen, it's not completely impossible that they may have been men, in fact, because I'm not seriously necessarily wanting to imply that Jane Austen was definitely a man, but because Samuel Richardson brought out the English novel in the first place, partly popularising letters from women, and partly popularising his idea of what women might think or say in letters, it's not impossible that many of the women authors we have known and read are in fact, or were in fact, male.